Ah, here we go. Have I been silent the entire time? Sorry, people who are listening. That's all right. We haven't gotten the good stuff yet. So in that case, let's talk about the digital divide. But no, we're going to talk about the midterm first. So your midterm, as you know, is next Wednesday. It's the duration of the class, all multiple choice. It's really just there to make sure those of you who don't consider yourselves to be creative thinkers get some marks, because this is just all fact stuff, multiple choice fact stuff, so that everyone's got like a solid base of marks you can rely upon in case you're kind of queasy about the podcast and the paper stuff. Right? So no support materials. It's just you and a pen, based on whatever we talked about in class and the textbook. And the textbook is based on class, so it's reiterative. And yes, I will select one question each from Dr. Rosh's lecture and Dr. Khan's, Dr. Al-Khatib's lecture. So those are relevant. Just one question each from each of those. So use your common sense. You have to memorize numbers or dates or stuff like that. Just general definitions, not precise ones. General concepts. And for example, I'm not an asshole. I'm not going to ask you, which is MDG number 2. That's just a stupid thing. It's a memory thing. I may ask you, which of the following list of things is an MDG or is not one? And I'm not the kind of asshole who will make the wording tricky to say, oh, he said children when in fact he means infants, whatever. You'll see. I'll see if I can give you some examples on the website in the next couple of days. Okay, any questions about the midterm? No? All right, excellent. People do know we had a midterm, right? It's not a shock. All right, good. All right, so now we'll talk about the digital divide. Who is this person? Who is Ada Lovelace? Anyone know? You should all know Ada Lovelace, especially the young women here. Ada Lovelace was the world's first computer programmer. Does that shock you? Ada Lovelace lived in the 19th century. And she has a certain famous pedigree. She is the daughter of Lord Byron, the poet. And she was the first programmer because she was a logician. And back in those days, computers obviously didn't exist, but there was a guy named Charles Babbage who put forth an idea for creating the first computational engine, the Babbage engine, which he could not invent at the time because the materials were not available for him. About 15 years ago, scientists finally put together the Babbage engine, and it works. So his design for the world's first computer actually would have worked. And Ada Lovelace put together the first set of instructions for the Babbage engine that would have run had the engine been available. So it was essentially the world's first modern computer program. And that's why in the 90s, there was a computer program called Ada, named after her. And every year there is Ada Lovelace Day, which is on her birthday, which celebrates not just computer programming, but women in technology. So it's back to me already. Keep on playing with it. Come on, keep passing around. Just hang on if you want to, and whatever. Okay, so there's a reason I'm passing that around. Okay, so Ada Lovelace Day is October 7th. Obviously, I've been using the slide for 3 years, 2011, but wasn't that long ago. So today, obviously, we're talking about computer stuff, and how is computer stuff relevant for global health? Does it shock you that this is a topic that we talk about in global health? It shouldn't. Dr. Rosh, who was here last class, she is impressive for a number of reasons, one of which is she received what's called a Grand Challenges grant. And that's put forward by Grand Challenges Canada based on the Gates Foundation model. And they tend to like creative technological solutions to global health problems. And some of the ones that have been proposed in the Grand Challenges competition are things that use cell phones to address global health problems. And I think one of her projects involved using cell phones as reminders for nutritional updates. And have a colleague who broke the field on this by using cell phones for the first time to contact HIV patients in East Africa rather, that allowed them to better engage their clientele. And I was pitching one recently using cell phones to contact all the men in a certain country to inspire them to have paternal investment in maternal care by using male sports figures to associate masculinity with healthcare and stuff. So it's all kinds of interesting things we can do. There's one called Mood of the Nation, which I always point to. Mood of the Nation is put forth by the Irish government. And what they do is they use live Twitter data to figure out the prevalence of depression in Ireland. You can go to their website and watch in real time where people are probably suicidal geographically in Ireland. They use the geolocation aspect of Twitter handles, and they try to, weight whether or not certain statements like, I'm depressed today, or I'm not feeling good, whether that's aspects of suicidation. Obviously, it's not precise, but with enough data, things get more precise. And all that started a few years ago with Google Flu Trends. Who knows what Google Flu Trends is? No, Google discovered something dramatic a few years ago. They discovered that if you look at the search patterns that people were typing into Google, like flu or coughing or mucus, whatever it might be, and with sufficient search patterns, the AI, the artificial intelligence, that is the Google server farm, could figure out with a degree of probability whether or not this individual represents a case of the flu. And it was so accurate that it was almost precisely representative of our epidemiological surveillance data of the flu, but it was free and it was indirect. And for a couple of years, Google Flu Trends was making projections of the flu in the US that were almost precise. Now, it's kind of failed since then because people now look for it and thus overestimate the prevalence, etc. And that started the big data revolution of the last few years, you probably heard of. Anyway, I got off on a tangent. The point there is that computers now, and especially social media and the internet and cloud computing, are intimately related to global health. Also, a couple years ago, in Chicago, there was an important court case where it was ruled that access to Facebook is a human right. Can you see the argument for that? No one can see the argument for that? Yeah? Sure. What else do people use Facebook for? Is it just for social life? Is it just for sharing pictures of your cat? For employment. There it is. For anything. So, in fact, that was put forth by the ACLU, who was representing a bunch of pedophiles, actually, because Facebook had a policy that any sex offenders could not be back on Facebook. But they're arguing that to deny these individuals access was to deny them employment and other kinds of vital aspects of modern life. So it was ruled in court that, in fact, you cannot deny individuals access to Facebook or other kinds of online life because that's a human right these days. Having said that, what proportion of the world do you think has access to Facebook? Is it more than half? Is it less than half? I don't know. Actually, I do know somewhere, I've forgotten. But it's actually not as many as you might think. So it begs the question, is access to certain aspects of online life a human right? And if you don't have access to it, does that somehow slow down your development as a culture and a community? And that is the digital divide, the gap between those who have access to computational power and those who do not have access to computational power. Because remarkable things have been happening under your feet, under your nose, the last few years, accelerating at phenomenal rates. In the last 2 years, as a civilization, we have produced more data than the entire history of human civilization before that. And it's accelerating. We have more data we can compute right now. I can cite all kinds of computational laws, something called Boone's Law that talks about the ability of computers to actually process data. The human genomics revolution was supposed to violate these laws. It didn't, because we moved into the cloud that increased our computational power. But everything's moving much faster than we thought it was going to be. So if you go back for a second and think about the most fundamental resource in the modern economy is knowledge, and therefore learning, who has access to knowledge? Well, now, look at all of you with your computers. No one ever comes to class without a computer now. Well, a few do. One person doesn't. I'll point her out, you. Right? So if you don't have access, somehow you're disadvantaged. You cannot learn as much. And increasingly, with more education happening online, we have disadvantaged individuals who can't access remote learning. So here's a quote from Nelson Mandela from 2004, and he says, the capacity to communicate will almost certainly be a key human right. And in fact, in order to eliminate economic differences between poor countries and not so poor countries, information has to be the conduit for doing so. So the fact that Nelson Mandela understands that is telling, because he's an old guy. Well, before he died, he was an old guy. You think individuals like that aren't attuned to the importance of technology, but he's a special man. So the global digital divide refers to the disparity of access to the internet. I gave a talk in Guyana 10 years ago on evidence-based medicine. Everyone knows what evidence-based medicine is, right? Okay. You've been taught it endlessly in this program. So evidence-based medicine involves the ability to make clinical decisions based upon the best evidence at your disposal by accessing peer-reviewed literature. And this was a presentation given to fairly wealthy physicians in that country. And to a man each one, to a man each one said, that's great, we would love to do this, but our problem is we don't have access to the papers, to the studies. How can we have access to it? The journals cost too much money. They won't send them to this country because in the shipping, it'll get lost in the tropics, it'll just melt anyway, right? We haven't got the computers to run the CDs that actually play the journals. It's 10 years ago. Now everyone's got these computers, but now all the journals are online. And if you haven't got access to the internet, you can't access the wisdom accumulated over generations of health science. Therefore, you cannot make good clinical decisions. So we can talk to her blue in the face about the need to have evidence-based processes, but if you can't access the evidence, what's the point? And that really is a digital divide, is accessing that evidence. So 2002, it was found that 88% of all internet users are from the rich countries, but they comprise only 15% of the world's population. Can you guess the percentage of Africans who have access to the internet? Give me a number. Somebody, throw it out. You're correct, 7, good enough, right? 7% is the percentage. That includes, you know, the Cairo and South Africa, which are very, very well-wired places, but they're diluted across the entire continent, right? So if we've already agreed that access to these resources are critical for development, and yet only 7% of that country has access, well, that's a problem. This graph shows us the rate of internet use over time, from 1997 to 2007, and the blue curve is, of course, wealthy countries, developed countries. The green is global average, and the red is the developing world. So we are not typical of the world. We're an extreme case, so we cannot consider our experiences to be representative of most of the world. And yet, the rest of the world is catching up at a much faster rate. So if you go to a seashore village in South India, for example, they haven't changed their way of economics and life in generations. The fishermen still go out and come back and try to sell their fish, but access to a cell phone there has changed their ability to get the best price for their fish. So now, instead of showing up to the port and going to the first market stand they see and selling their fish, what they do is when they're coming back on the boat, open up the cell phone and they call around to see who's got what prices, and they go to the most advantageous price stall. So a simple investment of a very basic cell network and very, very cheap-ass phones has revolutionized people's lives in those parts of the world. And a place like India, as you know, is rapidly becoming a telecom hub. Having said that 7% of Africa's are online, even their hub is better than ours in many ways. I was blogging in the Congo jungle 10 years ago from my phone. I can't do that from my office because the Wi-Fi here is so horrible. Right? So, right? And so the price structures around the world are changing as well. That's why it's so much cheaper and easier for an Indonesian, for example, to get access to a cell phone than it is for us. There are different privacy regulations. You have to sign a contract and things like that. In many ways, it's easier for a previously poor country to enter the 21st century digital age than it was for us, because we had to tear down all our hardwired infrastructure and put up cell towers. If you don't have that hardwired stuff to begin with, you go straight to the cell towers. It's cheaper, it's faster. So the barrier to entry is not as great. It just requires an investment up front. So how is the digital divide relevant to health? As I mentioned, evidence-based medicine, medical research. What is CME? Anyone know that term? No, it's continuing medical education. So continuing medical education is a critical aspect of a clinician's evolution through his or her career. So obviously, the way we process certain kinds of clinical techniques evolves over time. If you don't have access to that evolution, you're still functioning as a doctor in a previous paradigm, a generation in the past. That's a shame. So that's why we require CME for most clinicians around the world. If you don't have access to information, you can't do CME. So part of my consulting gigs is traveling around the world doing CME to places where they don't have access to ready-made, to instantaneous communication. We have use of e-health tools to increase access to healthcare. What does that mean? Well, we have these new technologies now that allow you, if you live in a remote area, to access a doctor remotely. Obviously, they can't palpitate your pulse and things like that, but they can interview you or ask you questions or take a history. And every now and then, some consultant comes to me wanting my advice on some new technology. A recent one was this company had invented a kiosk that has a video feed with a public health nurse somewhere and a slot where you stick your arm in, and it takes your blood pressure, and it can take a blood sample, and you can pee in the thing and everything, and it does all the diagnostic stuff and transmits all that information to a nurse somewhere in the city. And they're trying to sell this for communities in the extreme north and places like that. Do you see any barriers to setting that up? Because it would never, in my opinion, it would never fly in Canada. So I told them to go to the US instead. Do you know why it wouldn't fly that much here? You see the problems? Yeah.
There's just a barrier of like they might not know how to use it.
Sure, but they're trying to sell it here in northern communities where you've got like miners who are, Western people who know how to use it. But why wouldn't it fly necessarily? The barriers are administrative. So how do you bill for your online time if you have a billing system based upon fee for service? Right? The machine took the blood pressure. I didn't take it. Can I bill for that? So there's a billing barrier. There's a administrative and governmental barrier. How do you incorporate this into your processes? So those are some stuff you have to consider all the time. We wrote a business plan for a robotic surgery unit in London, Ontario. And their idea was to have, we're practicing doing surgery from across the room. A surgeon will operate the device here and the robot will do it over there. I said, no, you're doing it from like orbit, right? So there's no limit here to how far you can go. And now, in fact, they're actually trying that out, doing remote robotic surgery from thousands of miles away. So this is coming around. That's not what we're doing yet in the extremely poor environments, but that's what we're talking about with remote care. IT is essential for HIS. HIS stands for Health Information Systems. And an HIS really is, if you're looking for a place to invest in your career, this is a hot place to invest in your career, HIS development. And every country needs one, and many countries are trying to build them, and they don't know how to get through many of the barriers. So I was involved in putting one together in Guyana. So we had a team of programmers laying out all the infrastructure and the programming languages, but no one knew how to do the epidemiology, like what data do you collect, what indicators do you collect. And HIS is a way of tracking patients through a system for billing purposes, for diagnostic purposes, for making sure there's no abuse of the system and no like double billing or overprescribing. Also useful for surveillance. So with an HIS, we can determine if an outbreak happens somewhere, we know instantaneously in the system. Also use an HIS to report back to funders. One of the things we're developing in Guyana was the HIS was meant to do several things. One, it maintained patient records, because at the time we've got one clinic, we got a bunch of records that were literally stored in the bathroom, paper records stored in the bathroom. And a place where it rains a lot, that's not cool. You've got the same patient has 8 different records, 8 different doctor's offices. You have that now too, by the way. Your doctor's got one copy of your records. If you go to the ER, there's another copy. If you go to the walk-in clinic, there's another copy. They don't talk to each other. I don't know if you know that. They don't talk to each other. You've got like endless records of your medical history all over this country if you've ever moved anywhere, and they're not collated at all, because we are not in this country very advanced when it comes to HIS. But there's an opportunity if a country already doesn't have an information infrastructure to go in there and build a clean one from the ground up, as we were trying to do. So that's the first thing we tried to do. The second thing was to have a way to avoid double dipping. So if you walk into that clinic over there and get a prescription, you come to see this clinic here, we won't give you the same prescription because you already saw them. Why go twice and build a system twice? You get to track that now. And if you are, let's say you're a TB patient who needs to be monitored to make sure you're compliant with your drug so there's no TB resistance, we can monitor that with an HIS to some extent. If your name changes, you have to be able to monitor that. If you're a pregnant woman who suddenly has a child, the child is now a new patient. Unbelievably, that's an information challenge. How do you deal with one, now two? They got the same, like when it was in the womb, it had the same medication history. So that's actually a difficult thing to process from an information standpoint. Then another big challenge was reporting standards. So in the field, especially a country like Guyana, which has endless donors, USAID, CETA, European Union, Gates Foundation, Clinton, every single hospital, a nurse's job is tripled by filling out freaking forms all the time. So report back to their funder, because this program here is funding the tuberculosis drugs, and this program here is funding the the post-intervention psychiatric care, and each one requires a new form to fill out. It's nonsensical, eats up so much time and energy. So RHIS was meant to do the form automatically. Okay, and the last thing it was meant to do was, again, surveillance. That is, if we saw a certain cluster of certain kinds of diagnoses, it would trigger an alarm, and an email would go to the important individual going, hey, we saw more cases than expected of tuberculosis here and there. What do you think the barriers to setting up that system were? Because frankly, it was really hard, and I don't think it was sustained. I think it's dead now. What were the barriers? No idea? Yeah. No, that's an interesting perspective, but no, they want to share. They're on board. Yeah.
There's nothing like installed to allow them to share.
So there's no infrastructure yet. Okay, but we're building that. Okay, that's part of what our project was involved with. Yeah. The training was a huge one. Huge, huge, huge. So everyone has, unbelievably, everyone has a basic understanding of computers now in most remote parts of the world. When I go at my projects in the remote interior of the jungle, the kids run up to me, and when I get off the canoe, and the first thing they want to see is my cell phone to see how many megapixels the camera has. Because everyone's got a basic understanding of technology. The question is, do you understand this system? Right? And when it comes down to figure out these forms and that form, you got to press this button, that button. It's time consuming, and no one's got time, especially these individuals who are already overtaxed with reporting standards. Okay, any other barriers? It has to do with the infrastructure, another one. I mentioned this in another lecture where we first arrived with open access materials, Apache servers, Linux-based command systems. All that stuff is free. So for the money we had, we could have spent that money wisely with maximum penetration. But when the political structure changed, we couldn't go open access anymore. We had to go Microsoft for everything, and the prices went up. And so everything was curtailed back again. So the political dimension was such that the copyright domain prevented us from having as profound an impact as we could have. So those are some of the challenges there, but there you have it. So the importance of a digital divide, criticisms. The gap might not be real, some people say, it might just be perceived. As I mentioned, the kids in the canoe know all about computers, so where's the gap? On the other hand, there's definitely a gap in the sense that we see that only 7% of Africa has measurable access. Technologies are transient. So I mentioned Facebook as a right. Will Facebook be around in 15 years? Probably not. Be replaced by something else. So does it matter that people don't have access to Facebook? And the Chinese don't have Facebook. They've got their own version, or Twitter. They have their own version of Facebook and Twitter. So they represent 1/7 of the world. So that's not a small thing. So as computers get smarter, the need for expertise will reduce. So when I came through the system as a computer programmer, I'm a good programmer. I can program in machine code down to this basic hexadecimal codes, at least some serious skills. Now you just point at something and it does the work for you. So your barrier to entry into an IT system is quite low. And as the machine gets smarter and smarter, it takes less and less for people to be able to use them. So one argues that as the machines improve, the gap goes away. That's another argument. Okay, now we're on to this thing. So no one knows what this is. Huh? No one's seen this before. There it is right there. So Clive's taking care of it. This is the EXO laptop, or the OL PC laptop, invented by a man named Negroponte at MIT. And the idea was, back in the day, maybe 6 years ago, that if you could have every single child in the world have access to a computer, a lot of stuff would go away. So he argued. He argued that if every child had a computer, you wouldn't need to teach them how to use it. They're smart enough to figure it out if it's fairly self-evident anyway. And in many of these places where there's no electricity, if you find a way for it to be charged on its own, it becomes literally the only light and heat source in the home, and the benefits of the child accessing technology will have downstream effects on the rest of the household. The problem was, back when this was first pitched, computers were crazy expensive. I want you to be aware of the tools you have in front of you right now and how they are descended from that device. Okay, so what Negroponte did X numbers of years ago, he brought together, I think it was Google, Intel, Microsoft, some other players, and they were going to build the world's first indestructible, ultra cheap, portable laptop for every child in the world. And the idea was it's going to be less than $100 per laptop. Back then, the average laptop was $2,000. So, I mean, this one cost me $200. This is a Google Chromebook. So it's not unusual not to have cheap ones. But the idea of a $100 laptop, that was insane at the time, insane. And they decided we're going to make it indestructible. We're going to make them, you can read them out because kids are out in the field all the time in poor countries. So they've got to be resistant to glare. They got to be resistant to sand and water. That's a waterproof, sandproof laptop. It has to have an incredibly long battery life, an 8-hour battery life. Now, this has an 8-hour battery life. It's typical now. Back in the day, that was unheard of. That one has it. It has to have extended Wi-Fi capability. So it's got those ears on the side. That's so it can have, you know, if you're in a field somewhere, you got to be able to access your Wi-Fi. All those things he added on. Plus, it's got to be cheap, 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 cheap. So they invented an operating system based on Linux that was free, and that's what that's based on. It's also very, very child-friendly. So they leveraged a hell of a lot of goodwill and expertise to build that device. And the model for distributing it was, if I, in the rich part of the world, wanted one, I had to buy one for a child elsewhere too. So I bought that one, and automatically one was shipped to some kid in a poor country. And their barrier was they tried to get countries to sign up as well. So they approached, I think Brazil and India are the only ones who bought onto it. I could be wrong. But the idea was the country would buy them in bulk and then give them away for free to the students. What do you think of that idea? Shake your head. Why?
Ownership is a big barrier here. There needs to be balance. Like, you can't give someone like that for free.
Okay.
Because there's no. When you spend your money on something, you're protective of it.
Okay.
And you have to earn it, and to do it for free.
So you think it wouldn't be valued by the child if they got it?
I mean, they would have a different value.
Okay. That's not what was observed, but okay. That was not the barrier that was observed. Can you see other barriers or problems with this model? Yeah.
Countries actually just sell it to them?
That's possible, but you're right in the sense that the barrier was the distribution. That's one of the barriers. We know how to get penetration, but nobody was selling it. Yeah.
If it was given to these children, would the adults take it themselves?
No, the idea was, again, it's child-centered. It's not really useful for adults. And there was a security feature where it can only be opened by the child for the first couple of days of passwords and stuff. That's an interesting idea. That wasn't what was observed, though.
It would be like kids that are in school. So if you're not going to school, you probably wouldn't have access to it.
That's interesting, and that was kind of observed in the large distribution models. But the idea of it was we'd actually take it in the village and give it to every kid you saw. Any other barriers? Yeah.
Was it given to enough children? Like, did enough people buy it?
No, it did not. It failed. It's a failed project, in my opinion. So
Like other kids would see someone with it and take it from them.
that was considered, but again, it had the security feature where for the first month or so, it could not be used by anyone but that child. It kind of, I didn't know how it worked, but it only worked for one person. Anything else you see wrong with it? If you play with it, in my opinion, it's not intuitively obvious how to work it. I've given it to children to try to figure out. I said, what the hell is this? So there was a barrier in the assumption that it was obvious. So they actually had to start making workshops to help teach people how to use this. One of them. Anything else come to mind? Why don't you have one? Why doesn't everyone have one? It's a beautiful, it was 20 years ahead of its time, technological wise. One of the things that happened was the people around that table, when they started developing the idea for this, thought, that's a really good idea. Excuse me a second. And they leave the room, and that's where the netbook came from. The netbook came right out of that. So the idea of solid state computing, dirt cheap, $100 computers, that's based on that. So instantly the netbook came out and just undercut the market for that, first of all. Second, there was a feeling that if you're going to learn to use a computer, learn something useful, learn Microsoft Word or something, why use this fake operating system that no one cares about? Now, since then, you actually can suck out the operating system and install like slower version of XP on there. And if one day I'll do that just for fun. All right, so they try to do that. But now, of course, it's too late because the technology, this thing, $200, a Chromebook is so light years beyond that. Your tablets are light years beyond that now. The technology has moved beyond it. It's cheaper to produce tablets for $20 than it is for that for a couple hundred. The tablets do a lot more. So, again, Nicholas Negroponte invented this for MIT. It was a cheap laptop for every child in the world. And the assumption was every kid could learn how to use it. And it was supposed to be under 200, well, under 100 first, under 200. You probably noticed you can turn it around, turn it into a tablet because I thought that had greater penetration. But the tablet function was even more expensive than the non-tablet function. As I mentioned, it's indestructible, open source, outdoor use, no moving parts. Now you take that for granted. I look around, almost none of you have CD drives, right? Or whirring hard drives. Those are moving parts. Like your tablets, no moving parts, this, no moving parts. That's an incredible innovation, a laptop with no moving parts. The Wi-Fi and child friendliness. Okay, so here are the controversies. Can a laptop alone do the job it claimed it could do? Is a laptop a symptom of something, or is it the cause of something? The assumption was it was the cause of something, right? Maybe this software that's on there isn't that useful. Right. I mean, hopefully play a bit more on there and look at the selection. There's like a music a recorder. There's a chat function. The Wi-Fi is amazing, by the way. There's a word processor that's kind of useless, a browser that's kind of useless. But and can it achieve sufficient penetration? Obviously, it didn't. And then, of course, the new competitors. When people saw it coming out, it was outcompeted. So now we have this, the XO tablet. This is actually in the market now. Based on that, the idea is we use tablet technology and drag this whole, the assumption is still in place. Now every child will try to get an XO tablet. I haven't been following whether or not that is successful or not. But the next step is going to be, what's another one? If you accept the theory that a device per child will change the world, what device would you go with? Yeah, a phone. That seems to be obvious. Okay, so a lot of people are talking about that now, that maybe the phone is the path to making sure everyone has access to the grand hub of species intellect. Okay, this is what the XO laptop looks like, tablet looks like. So it's pretty cool. Okay, oh, more stats about the tablet. So that's the XO tablet laptop story. The other thing to talk about when we talk about the revolution of information technology and development is microfinance. We haven't really touched on microfinance in this class, but who knows what microfinance is? You do. And what is it?
Microfinance involves small individual loans that allow small business owners to get their business off their feet or expand their business.
Right, exactly. So if you consider, it's a commercial model that holds that it's not about charity, but investment. So a lot of small village-based businesses, the argument goes, could be sustained or rescued or even started with minimal investment, something resembling $20, $100, $1,000 even. And instead of spending tens of millions of dollars trying to change entire communities, invest a couple hundred on one family so they can start their yarn business or their sheep shearing business, or maybe a consortium of individuals who will buy thread and make clothing and sell it at a profit. So you're investing in the ability of a community to sustain itself economically. Traditionally, we tend to invest mostly in women, not men endeavors. Any idea why that is? Yeah.
Women have a lot more of a trickle-down effect. So men take money and they go home and they drink booze. Women go home and take the money and feed the children and build a new wall for the house and be responsible. And
Sure. Well, yeah, okay. Let's not take it too far. But yeah, the assumption is investment in the woman is investment in the family. Investment in the man is investment in a risky business. That's the first thing. Second is the women tend to be easily found. They tend to stay in the community or near the home, whereas the man may take his investment geographically further afield. So, and thirdly, people don't traditionally invest in women. So this is an opportunity to overcome that traditional barrier. So it was perceived to be the great saving grace, the great savior of development. And Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Prize for his microfinance endeavors a few years ago. Some issues arose with microfinance the last few years. The ugly underbelly, the vulnerability of it came to the forefront. Any ideas what that might be? Why does microfinance fail very often? Not always, but very often. Yes?
Does that have to do like with how they manage to get that money there? So like something like this website might actually like take some of the funds that you send so that it's not even that.
Okay, we're not there yet. I mean, we're on top of the website yet, but okay. It's not, no, that's not what we're talking about. Yeah?
The sustainability of it. So like if it, sure they can start this business, but if they don't keep it going, like no one's gonna want to invest in it afterwards.
It is a risk. You're right. That's not why it fails though, because some will fail, but some will succeed. I think you're next.
Does it give money but like doesn't really advise on how to
That's true. So you are relying upon the individual's abilities to manage. So it's a capitalist model. That's absolutely true. And
I'm just thinking that in a really, really poor community, if they give a little bit of money to start your own business, that's great, but who's going to buy that stuff if nobody else is?
you know what? That's part of that what you're saying. So there isn't an assumption that the business model is good to begin with. But the counter argument is it's not a lot of money. So from our point of view, it doesn't matter. Now, other more complicated things arise. These individuals who are receiving the money are, by definition, poor investment risks. Otherwise, they go to the bank and get money. So you're investing in people who probably have reasons not to be investable for, so they're bad risks to begin with. So the default rate is expected to be high. Second, as Quinn mentioned, is a lot of these people may be fronts for other interests, especially the women. We saw in parts of India where women will be put forward by their husbands, for example, that get this loan, say it's for a business, and will use it for other purposes. So the people who are taking the financial risk of going into debt are not the people who are receiving the money. We can't control that. As investors, we can't control that. Right? So, and then we have the heartbreaking trend of people accepting these loans, not to start businesses, but to pay off other debts. So they're delaying debt repayment. So for a while, and it's still going on in South Asia in particular, there are whole epidemics of debt suicides that have been continued by microfinance. So there are people who just go into debt for whatever reason. Maybe there's a death in the family, they couldn't pay their mortgage, so they borrowed some money to pay their mortgage, and now they're horribly in debt. So they borrowed some money now for this business that maybe doesn't exist to pay off that debt, but now they're in debt to this, and goes on and on and on. And they kill themselves out of shame or of desperation, and that leaves their families, of course, bereft of support. It's a horrible, tragic story. But if you look up the epidemic of debt suicides, particularly in Asia, it's the numbers are staggering. Now, recently, microfinance has moved into the commercial realm. So now we have corporations, for-profit corporations running microfinance routines, and their due diligence is not as intense as the original creators had intended. So microfinance is not important. Not perfect. Having said that, there's some many good aspects to it. So the website Kiva, you may have heard of. If not, this is your first opportunity to look at it. It's considered to be one of the successes of microfinance. So Bill Clinton is a big supporter of Kiva, and I give them money also. But Kiva, what it does is it allows you as an individual to make an account and to invest $10, whatever it might be, how much money you want, in a village-based developing world enterprise. So there's a huge list of them, literally thousands of people asking for money. It could be, hey, Bob here in Nicaragua needs $10 to fix his roof so he can continue selling his fish. Or this woman here in Nepal needs to get some feed for her sheep business so she can continue to sell, whatever it might be. There's a little bio there. And they have a certain amount of time to accumulate enough money to make their loan active. So you and hundreds of other people will be contributing kinds of money. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. It's a good deal. But to bring us back to the conversation of digital divide, here's an opportunity to meld a couple of interventional paradigms. One is around microfinance, the other is around the digital revolution. They've come together here. A website now is the mechanism for crowdsourcing investment in community-based initiatives. It's transformative. It's pretty cool. So again, for Kiva, the first world people sign up as investors, and the poor country entrepreneurs sign up as borrowers. And we lend very small amounts, and they do repay the loans. In fact, the loan repayment rate is actually very, very high. all my loans have been repaid, and it's reinvestment all the time. So if you're interested in starting something interesting, I encourage you to do so. It's both interesting and rewarding, and costs you $10, and you can change someone's life if you so desire. So that's how it works. Oh, here's an example of a borrower on Kiva. Here is someone in Uganda asking for $240 for each of 20 people. And they will repay that money in 4 months. And there are 20 women who are looking to borrow for 10 years for what? They are going to, very unspecific what they're asking for. Okay. All right. So the microfinance criticism, to summarize them, it is a privatization of a public safety net. What does that mean? It means that maybe it should be the government's job to take care of these individuals. If you're so desperately poor that you need $10 to keep your system going, then that should be government job. So we're privatizing that responsibility. So the businesses are dependent on loans now rather than investments. So an investment's a bit different from a loan. Investment is now I would own part of this business, and it's in my vested interest to keep on investing in it, whereas a loan is just getting my money back. I want money. And as I mentioned, the borrowers can be fronts for other individuals. So as I mentioned, here is the microfinance suicide epidemic. It's ongoing. Oh, okay. So other aspects of the digital divide. Social networking, we talked about briefly. Is access to a social network a human right? Open access publishing. Okay, so the journal, the Health Sciences Journal, for which Arlana is our executive editor, is an open access journal. Open access means it doesn't cost you, the reader, anything to read it. This is a way to overcome that barrier of having to pay to get access to the evidence that we need to inform our clinical decision making. So the open access revolution has been with us for a few years now. And what they've done is that they reversed the burden of paying for it from the reader to the writer. So I, as a scientist, if I want to publish in an open access journal, I submit my article, they review it, they say, well, publish this if you pay our publishing fee. And the publishing fee can be anything from $100 to $5,000. The going rate is about $2,000 per paper. It's a lot of money, obviously, but most of us have grants or something to pay for it. So this university will actually pay for 2 grants of up to $2,000 a year for every scholar here to publish an open access journal. And the library system is right now celebrating Open Access Week. You should go into the library and look at their documentation about that. So I'm a big supporter of open access, and hopefully you will be as well. Open access has been criticized for lowering the bar for quality publication. It's much easier to publish now. I think that's a good thing, but some people think it's a bad thing. Depends on your perspective, but that's what's with us now. If you want to go see a list of open access journals, go to doaj.org. That's the directory of open access journals.org. And those are all journals that will publish for free, meaning anyone can read them. And maybe they'll charge writers, maybe they won't. It tends to vary. Okay. So now almost every journal now has an open access component. Like the Lancet's got open access component. BMJ has one. CMAJ has one now. So it's the norm. Otherwise, it costs tens of thousands of dollars a year to subscribe to one of these journals. Isn't that ridiculous? We can talk about the ethics of this until I'm blue in the face, but think about it for a second. You as a taxpayer is funding my research through a grant that I will publish in a journal that will now charge you again money to read it. But you just paid for this. Why should you have to pay again to read it? So there's an ethical, legal aspect of why open access serves the taxpayer. Distance education. We mentioned already that there is a revolution happening in education. Increasingly, traditional education like this is becoming disfavored and overly expensive. And you can access pretty much any content you want by going online if you're looking for an education. And the future seems to be disconnecting education from certification. So if you want to learn something for free, I encourage you, go to YouTube, go to any one of these online classes, open universities. Google has an open university now. You can learn anything you want from an online course for free. If you want a piece of paper proving that you learned it, well, that costs money. Right? So disentangling those two concepts seems to be where the world is going right now. And I think it's a good thing, because suddenly people in extremely remote areas who can get them access to high-speed internet can have access to high-quality education. And the last point here is the singularity. Has anyone heard of the singularity before? It's a weird concept in computer science and information technology that no one agrees on what it means. There are different versions of it. If you listen to weird podcasts, they'll say, yes. Okay, that's a good way of looking at it. That's perfect definition from a computer science standpoint. So it's a point at which the computer technology becomes not self-aware, but self-sufficient to the point it can make decisions. So an AI, an actual AI. The anthropological perspective on the singularity is a bit different. It's not the point at which the computer becomes overly complex. It's the point at which our technological civilization becomes inaccessible to those not in it. So ask yourself this: could you describe an email to a caveman? If you had a conversation with, a Cro-Magnon from 200,000 years ago, and you had 10 minutes and you spoke the same language to explain what an email is, could you find enough common concepts, any common tropes and themes to get the idea across? Considering that a caveman probably his entire life saw a grand total of 100 people, probably never moved more than 50 miles the radius of his world, right? So the idea of didn't have written language, barely has spoken language. Could you get that idea across? So enough technological advancement has happened in that gap to the point where these two civilizations are incapable of interacting. So the argument goes, is it possible that the developed part of the world can acquire so much technology that the undeveloped part becomes inaccessible? That's the anthropological singularity. Are we there yet? I don't think so, but that's part of the threat that some people talk about. Oh, last slide. Any questions about anything? That was fast. What do you think about the XO laptop? Crappy, good, interesting? Hard to use, yes. Of course, the little keys are for children, not for your big clumsy thumbs there, Filkers. Yeah. Yeah. It's very attractive, isn't it? When I first got it, I was so excited, but since then, other laptops has come about. I own 14 computers, and that's my favorite one because it's cool looking. I keep it in the corner there. Oh, how cool this is! And people always talk about it. But yeah, it's disappointing how it hasn't evolved as much as it could have. So we'll see what happens next. If you're looking for a place to invest your career, anything involving global health and IT, I think that. Yeah, I charged it before I came here. Okay, so yeah, you can purchase a crank charger or a solar charger. And the plan was also to install in every few couple hundred miles a Wi-Fi projector that was satellite linked. So, I mean, Gates for the longest time was looking into satellite-based Wi-Fi. So that's probably coming at some point. Interesting, huh? I should show you I've got some crank chargers also, because why not? Yeah. All right then. Hey, well, so we'll see. When's that class? Monday? Right. Okay. So there's one more class for the midterm. Excellent.